faith, firearms, freedom. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio. I am your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 30, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. So, how was your week? Did you watch any of the Olympics? Yeah, me neither. Well, I did sit down and watch the opening ceremony, though. I don't know why. I do like watching the parade of athletes just to see all the different countries march through. But the rest of it was sort of like an acid trip, or at least what I imagine an acid trip would be like. There was all this faux celebration for this team of refugees, but I didn't really understand that. Their home countries are fielding teams, but they're refugees. So how does that work? Why don't they just go back and compete with their home countries? It's all a political statement. It's just a bunch of Bravo Sierra as far as I'm concerned. Well, the commentators and the speech makers were preening about all the unity and togetherness and we are the world, and then we find out the stupid Lebanese team wouldn't share a bus with the Israelis. And so much for all your faux unity. Then there was the obligatory global warming alarmism, complete with all the lies about melting ice caps, which isn't happening, and flooding cities, which isn't going to happen because the ice caps are actually getting bigger. But never mind facts, we got to scare the crap out of people. It takes a special kind of hypocrisy to preach the end of the world hand-wringing when you're holding a competition in a country where it's the epicenter of the Zika virus outbreak, and you're in a city where they dump raw sewage into your waterways, and they clear large swaths of the rainforest to build venues, fancy venues for athletic events, and your citizens live in disease-filled slums. Maybe they could clean up their own country before preaching to the rest of us. Hopefully the Olympic torch is a giant citronella candle, so nobody gets sick while they're there. Swimmer Michael Phelps was chosen to be the flag bearer for Team USA, which is something he's never done before. Usually he skips the opening ceremony for preparation for his events. He wouldn't have been my choice because it seems like every other year he's in some sort of trouble drinking and driving. But my choice would have been Kim Rhode, who's won, I think, medals in, is it 5 or 6 straight Olympics? She would have been my choice. But the media wanted some chick whose accomplishments are being black, Muslim, hating Trump, and wearing a hijab. So I'm okay with Phelps. Anyway, the only thing I'm looking forward to is Kim Rhode and the shooting teams, which will be hard for me to find unless I can, watch them on Roku streaming after the events are already over, because all the coverage is pretty much going to focus on track and swimming and beach volleyball and soccer and basketball, which I really don't care about. But congratulations to 19-year-old Jenny Thrasher, who won the first gold medal of the games in the 10-meter air rifle for Team USA. Congratulations. That was pretty cool. Anyway, got some exciting news to share, non-Olympic related. You may have noticed the announcement on Facebook or in listening to in our listings on iTunes. Armed Lutheran Radio is now a member of the new Self-Defense Radio Network. And a thank you goes out to Paul Lathrop and Bob Main for putting together a group of like-minded voices. I'm honored to be included. Armed Lutheran Radio joins some terrific shows like the Handgun World Podcast, the Polite Society Podcast, Geeks, Gadgets, and Guns, the Gun Blog Variety Cast with my friend Sean Sorrentino, Politics Daily, Liberty on Point, Gun Freedom Radio, and more. We're just getting underway. We're still working on the website, but you can check out the Facebook page at armedlutheran.us/SDRN. We still don't really have the Facebook thing hasn't set in yet, so it's still got a bunch of crazy numbers at the end of the Facebook. You can search for it on Facebook. search for Self-Defense Radio Network, or you can go to armedlutheran.us/SDRN, and that'll take you to our Facebook page, and eventually it will point to our website once the website is up and running. Or you can search iTunes for Self-Defense Radio and find some of the other great shows that way. Now back to our show. Today, we've got another fun show for you. Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense joins us again. He's got a talk about the tools for your self-defense toolbox. Sergeant Bill has tips for zeroing your pistol so that you know where it's going to hit when you're shooting it. Mia Anstine brings us some excellent tips for choosing the right gun for female shooters. So guys, pay attention before you go buy your wife a gun. Trust me, I've been there. I've done that. We'll laugh at an Episcopal priest who spent $3,000 of his own money to make a statement on gun control, and now looks like he broke the law in doing it. And we're joined by a very special guest. Pastor Evan Goeglein of Faith Lutheran Church in Rogue River, Oregon, is here to discuss why all lives matter. Black ones, white ones, and blue ones. All that straight ahead on Armed Lutheran Radio.
The National Rifle Association's Eddie Eagle has taken that message to more than 15 million kids nationwide through a program endorsed by dozens of governors and state legislatures. And gun accident rates today are the lowest ever recorded. For 130 years, we've worked to put safety and freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
And welcome back. It's time now for a self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. One of the cliches you probably heard on the range is, well, that's another good tool for your toolbox, when referring to a tactic or technique and its viability. Usually you hear it when instructors trying to explain why they teach a certain thing without being able to justify it in a really meaningful way. Usually it's just a cop-out for important questions about the tactic or technique being discussed, and it really shouldn't be as accepted as a real answer as it often is. However, the saying itself warrants some further dissection as to the relevance of the metaphor and its usage as related to training tactics and techniques. The reason we have tools and toolboxes is that different tasks do require different tools. That's a fact. If you need to tighten up a hex bolt, a Phillips head screwdriver isn't going to do you any good. When we translate that into a metaphor for training, the tool we're talking about is the technique or tactic, and the task is the context. The tactic or technique, the tool, needed is dependent on the context of use. For instance, if I'm a Navy SEAL, I'm going to require different tactics and techniques to accomplish my mission than a civilian would for personal defense. If I'm a civilian and I spend a whole lot of time filling up my toolbox with tools that only Navy SEALs need, I'm probably going to have a really good-looking toolbox, but it's going to be filled with tools that are not really useful to me. The more an individual shooter values training, the more likely they are to accumulate multiple tools and even amass multiple toolboxes by taking lots of classes, watching lots of videos, going to a lot of different trainers, that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. I can remember my grandpa having an entire workshop full of every sort of tool you could think of that he had amassed over a long life of building and fixing things. Some of those tools he may have only needed once or twice, but they were still in there in his storage shed, and he might pull them out when he needs to, right? As someone who takes training seriously, you might have trained with several different trainers with several different backgrounds who may have taught you tactics or techniques that work for several different contexts. Like some of you might be competition shooters who also carry for personal defense. Some of you might be law enforcement officers who also carry in a civilian capacity when you're off duty. And if that's the case, you may have amassed many quote-unquote tools for your toolbox. But you'll have an important decision to make, and that's what tools to put on your tool belt. Your tool belt that you carry with you to the job site should only contain tools that you're proficient with and that you know you might need at a moment's notice for the most probable task you're likely to face on that job site. Your tool belt goes with you in your work truck and is always on your person at the job site. Sometimes the contents may change depending on what you expect to encounter, but they should stay pretty consistent if you're doing the same types of jobs every day. When I was a handyman, my tool belt looked the same, and it might change if I'm doing tile work as opposed to working on the exterior of a house, but generally speaking, I was going to have pretty much the same tools on my tool belt on any given day, and there was very little variation there. You want the tools you put on your tool belt to be efficient, practical, and versatile based on what your daily routine consists of. You don't want to have a tool belt that is overly bulky, and you don't want to have any wasted space. When you look at your training this way, you want to make sure that even if you have 10 different classes with 10 different methodologies in your toolbox, you may only choose the tactics and techniques that are most practical and efficient for your tool belt. So it would make no sense for an electrician to carry a hatchet on his tool belt, just as it would make no sense for a civilian concealed carrier to carry a 5-man room clearing technique on his, because you're probably never going to need it. An electrician may know how to use the hatchet, but just as you may need to know how to clear a room on a 5-man stack, but it isn't something that the electrician is going to need to carry around with him in order to do electrician stuff, because the hatchet just isn't going to be useful for his line of work. So yeah, it's great to take a lot of good classes and get as much knowledge as you can, and there's much to be gained by training with different instructors with different backgrounds who focus on different things. In doing this, you may in fact mass a large set of tools for your toolbox. Just make sure you're very careful about which of those tools go onto your tool belt when you go to the range to practice and when you live your daily life. Choose only the tools that apply to the most probable context of use and leave the rest at home in the shed, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's your personal defense tip for the week. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Check us out on the web at fundamentaldefense.com.
Armed Lutheran Radio is hosting a day of training with Aaron, the fundamentals of defensive-focused shooting. It's hosted by Mission 160 Tactical in Whitewright, Texas, on October 22nd from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Check out the show notes for a link where you can get more information and sign up. Use the promo code Lutheran, save 20% off the registration fee.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday night special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Hi, this is Reverend Ken Blanchard, also known as the Black Man with a Gun, and you're listening to my friend and brother from another mother, the Armed Lutheran.
As you know, here on Armed Lutheran Radio, one of the things that we really enjoy doing is poking fun at liberal Christians who allow their politics to define their faith. And that drives them to support a lot of crazy liberal social policies like gun control. Everything from the so-called common sense reforms all the way up to complete and total confiscation of all civilian-owned firearms. Well, when this story out of Lake Oswego, Oregon, hit my desk, I just had to laugh. You see, the District 2 Big League softball team in Oswego was raffling off an AR-15 rifle to raise money so that they could travel to a tournament in California. And Pastor Jeremy Lucas of the Episcopal Church, the Christ Church parish there in Oswego, bought 150 of the 499 raffle tickets. That's $3,000 of his own money out of his pocket. He said he wanted to help the team, but he also wanted to make a statement. He wanted to get the gun out of circulation. He did it in hopes that he could win to make a political statement by destroying the gun and turning it into a piece of anti-gun art. Well, you see, there's a little problem, though. You see, anti-gun lunatics like Pastor Lucas pushed through an anti-gun initiative last year, SB 941, the Oregon Firearms Safety Act, which makes it illegal to transfer a gun to a person who is not a licensed dealer, even if it's a temporary transfer, without first performing a background check. So when Pastor Lucas won the gun, he asked a parishioner to store it for him, and that's a violation of state law, punishable by a fine of up to $6,200 and a year in prison. Now, according to the pastor, it's a small symbolic act, he said. There are millions of guns, but this gun will never be used to kill kids in schools, kill people in movie theaters, kill people at an office party or at any other place of mass shootings. This gun will never be found by a child who accidentally shoots a friend. It will never be stolen and used to commit a crime or used to threaten a family in a domestic violence situation. If I had the chance for $3,000 to keep any of these things from happening, even one time, I'd do it again in a second, he said. On Monday, he said he was surprised to learn of the investigation. And the investigation they're talking about is the fact that the Lake Oswego police had received complaints about Pastor Lucas and his plans and have referred this to the Oregon State Police to investigate whether or not the pastor violated the law, which clearly he did. You see, this stupid law makes it a crime to transfer constructive possession of a firearm to an unlicensed individual, even if no money changes hands. You want to let a friend borrow a rifle to go hunting. Well, you have to get a background check. If you want to give a friend a gun because her husband or her boyfriend her ex-boyfriend is stalking her, maybe she's left her husband and she needs a gun for self-protection, so you offer her one, guess what? You better get a background check before you do it in Oregon. Let's say you have a troubled teenager in the house, or a troubled spouse, or you yourself are feeling depressed, or you start to worry about your own mental state, and you take your firearms collection and you take it to a friend or to a family member and you say, I don't feel comfortable with this being in the house right now. Can you hang on to this for me? Well, if you don't do a background check first, you've committed a crime in Oregon. That's gun safety. SB 941 is not. It doesn't do anything to reduce gun death. It doesn't reduce anything to reduce gun violence. It's nothing but a way to hinder law-abiding citizens. People like this poor, misguided pastor. And as the Oregon Firearms Federation points out in this article, if the pastor is prosecuted, it demonstrates the idiocy of this law. And he should be prosecuted. I hope they do prosecute him. But if he's not, it proves that for liberals and anti-gun people, they're above the law because they mean well. And that the law is really only crafted to target law-abiding gun owners. It really isn't intended to reduce violence or to save lives. It really is only there as a hindrance for law-abiding gun owners. The very kind of law, the very law that this fool supports, comes back to bite him because he didn't obey it. And what's worse, Pastor, in your arrogance and your zeal to make this statement, not only are you now in hot water, but you put your parishioner in hot water. Because by transferring that gun to them without a background check, they're in violation of the law too. Nice work, Pastor. Hope you're happy.
This is Brandon War, host of the Warzone Radio podcast, reminding you that life is a war zone, so it's best to always be armed. First with God's Word, then with a trusty firearm, and by listening to the Armed Lutheran podcast.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
This is your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill. Today's topic is going to be zeroing your pistol. Now, when you zero your pistol, you're going to want to zero it at either 10 or 20 or 25 yards, or maybe some of you bullseye guys want to go all the way out to 50. I can't see that far, so to get accurate groups. So there's not really much of a difference at the 10, 20, or 25 yard zeros with a pistol. Although the closer you get, it may vary at distance, because you have to think about it. There's a little bit of math involved with your bullet trajectory and your sights, so your point of aim and point of impact. I'm not going to get into all the math on it, but basically if you think about it, you're looking through your sights in a flat level plane. Your barrel in relation to it is going to be slightly aimed up, so that bullet is going to travel on an arc. And where you zero your pistol is not as doesn't affect your point of impact as much as it does a rifle, because of the ranges you'll shoot with a rifle and the arc of that bullet. But you still need to take that just for a little bit into account. Now, one of the most important things you need to verify is, does your gun have adjustable or fixed sights? And adjustable sights are just like they sound. They're adjustable. So you can adjust them for windage, left and right, or elevation, up and down. Now, a fixed sight, you can't adjust it for elevation, up and down, very easily, but you can adjust for windage, left and right. If you have adjustable sights, you're going to want a small screwdriver. It's usually what they use to make the adjustments on those. For fixed sights, you're going to want to bring a small hammer and a punch. This way you can make adjustments at the range while you're trying to zero it. You really need to start out by shooting some groups with your gun to see, with your specific load or whatever ammo you're going to use, where it's going to group at, where your point of aim and your point of impact, how they're going to vary, or if they're the same. If they're the same, you're good to go. If they're different, you need to do some adjusting. Now, I prefer to do both of my groups for checking my zero, shooting with the gun on a rest or on a bag or something, a sandbag. But I also like to stand up and shoot freestyle as well, because that way I can make sure that it's still going to be a proper point of aim, point of impact. So with those fixed sights, if, say, your pistol's shooting a little bit to the left, well, you're going to want to use that punch and that hammer and gently tap the sight so you can drift it in the direction that's going to bring your impacts back toward your point of aim. And do it in small increments until you get it right where you want it, where your point of aim is your point of impact. And it's the same thing with adjustable sights. You're just going to use a screwdriver and turn the little screws to make it go up, down, or left and right. Now, if you have fixed sights and you have an elevation problem, that's a bit more difficult and problematic. You can get an aftermarket front sight, and at a place like, say, Dawson Precision, and if you call them and talk to them and tell them where it's printing, you know, how high, at what range, they can do the math. They have the formulas to figure out how tall or how short your sight needs to be to get your point of aim and point of impact where they need to be. That's what I'd suggest to do. Some people will say that they can file on their front sight or file on their rear sight to adjust it the way they need to, which that's okay, but you have to be pretty steady with that file. Or you can just learn where your gun's point of impact is in relationship to your point of aim, and just know that that's where it is and go with that. But when you're all said and done getting your sights dialed in, what I recommend is you shoot groups at various distances to verify your point of aim and your point of impact. Everything from 3 yards, 5 yards, 7, 10, 15, 20, 25, even out to 50 if you want to. That way you'll have the confidence in knowing your pistol's zeroed right where you want it, your point of aim and point of impact are right where you need them to be. This has been Zeroing Your Pistol and your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
If you have questions for Sergeant Bill or a topic that you'd like to hear him discuss, visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. and send us a voice message or an email. We'd love to hear from you.
If you carry a gun for personal protection, it's imperative that you get a good holster. When I started out, I had no idea what that meant, and I went through a bunch of really bad holsters. Then I found Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. Cook's Holsters are custom made to fit your specific firearm. Available in lots of colors, including custom printed Kydex. Cook's Holsters are made in the USA and the great state of Georgia and come with a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get a 15% discount off everything in the store. You put a lot of time and money into the firearm you choose to carry for personal protection. Carry it in the best holster. cooksholsters.com.
Time now for Mia's Motivations on Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi there, hello, welcome to another week. I hope your Monday is a fabulous one. If you are like me, it has been super busy, and I am actually preparing for hunting season, so my busy is probably a little different than other people's busy. And one thing in preparation for hunting season, I have been approached by several men asking me questions about firearms. And what they're wanting to know is what is going to be the best rifle for their wife. And I get this question all the time. It's a super common question because I think men love their wives and they really want their wives to enjoy shooting as well as they do. So they're looking for the best. They really want to get the best thing the first time so that the woman in their life can be happy with shooting. And in this instance, I'm referring to hunting, but it's also true with handguns. Men don't know exactly what women are going to like, and what we like may vary. I mean, women are very unique. Our sizes, our features, everything. There are millions of different features and aspects to women. So that's why, men, you can never understand us. But when you're looking for a handgun, you know, as I'm saying about varying, just in myself and my daughter, I have really small, strong hands, strong forearms. I have an aggressive stance when I'm holding a pistol. And she is, being younger, her stance is more narrow than mine. She's tall, she's slender, her fingers are so long. So obviously her grip is going to be different than mine, and what she's going to think is ideal in a handgun is going to be different than what I think is ideal. So what you need to do is find a way to get her to try the firearms before you buy them. In a handgun specifically, one way to do that is contact your firearms retailer, go down there and chat with them, ask them if there's a way to try some of these firearms that you have in mind. And if they don't let you test the ones they have there, which many of them don't, some pawn shops will. That's another alternative. Another alternative besides the gun store or the pawn shop is find local firearms classes. And as you know, we all need to take classes. And if you are trying to get the lady in your life into shooting, she needs to take a class. So make sure, and you can contact the firearms instructors, talk to them personally, don't just email them and so forth. Talk to them, discuss what's going on, and find a class that's suitable for her. And then also ask if there are other firearms that they may offer for the students to demo. Here locally, we offer a class for new shooters, and myself and several other instructors, we bring 2 or 3 other handguns besides our standard 22 revolvers and semi-autos that we teach with. We offer other guns after the students have gone through the basic training. If they want to try a larger caliber or a smaller frame, we will let them when they show that they're ready. So that's another way to do that. And it's a way for your wife or girlfriend or even daughter, it's a way for them to get hands-on experience and understand what handguns feel like. And if you can do that as well with rifles, if you're looking to get someone in hunting, similar thing. Try before you buy. what you love may not be what she loves. I have a lot of girlfriends who really love smaller handguns, and I love a .45. So you got to get their hands on them and get them shooting so that they can find what they love. And then you will have a happy shooter for a long time. And on that note, I hope you are having a great week. If you would like to follow me or find more tips, you can just look up my name, Mia Anstine, and you can find my website, or I also have tips on YouTube. It's youtube.com/c/Mia Anstine. Have a great week, and we'll see what we can come up with next week to answer for you. Bye.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Since the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, the term Black Lives Matter has been a phrase we've heard all too often in America. The hashtag, the movement it represents, its adherents, claim that oppressed blacks are more likely to be killed by police when they walk out the door than by any other threat they face. They claim that racist cops are shooting blacks willy-nilly for no other reason than their skin color. They've marched and protested across the country, disrupted political events. You know the drill. At the Democrat National Convention in Philadelphia last week, they even disrupted a moment of silence for fallen law enforcement officers. Many of us argue that all lives matter, but that really seems to get under their skin and gets them worked up. Even the media and academia have taken up that argument, claiming that it's simply saying the words, all lives matter, is somehow offensive. Even Shepard Smith of Fox News, of all places, chastised a guest a couple of weeks ago for making that suggestion. And just last week, a member of the student government at the University of Houston was suspended for posting All Lives Matter on her social media account. The original intent of the movement and the name was to suggest that Black Lives Matter too, in addition to all other lives, because black lives are often, they say, undervalued in this country. Those of us who say all lives matter object to the distinction between the two. Both sides see it a different way. How should we as Christians view the issue? Well, here to discuss the subject is Pastor Evan Goeglein of Faith Lutheran Church in Rogue River, Oregon, and the co-host of Table Talk Radio. Pastor, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey, Lloyd, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. I appreciate you taking the time. Your co-host, Pastor Wolfmueller, has joined us several times, and he told us the history of Table Talk Radio, how it was a class project when you were in seminary. Is that right?
Well, we had been talking about the show, and at the same time I was taking a class that had to have like some kind of like evangelism project. So I kind of just did double duty, and I had to be working on stuff for the show anyway. And so I just started applying all the time I was putting into doing planning for the show in its infant stages as also a project for school. And so I just doubled it up there.
Two birds with one stone.
That's right.
Well, listening to the show, it's clear you're the glue that holds the whole thing together and keeps Wolfmueller on track, but he hogs all the limelight somehow. Not sure. That doesn't...
I remember when we started doing this, and he was describing himself as the theological bull rider, and I was described as the radio clown, the rodeo clown that would hang around. And now that we've been doing it for a while, I think that what's really self-evident is that he's a bit like the pretty blonde singing the halftime show. That when the music gets pulled, everybody realizes she's just lip singing, and it's really rather obvious. So I'm glad that you can appreciate that, Lloyd.
Well, you're doing all the heavy lifting, and he's over there on Facebook and Twitter. Well, in all seriousness, despite the mediocrity, I am a big fan of the show, and the interplay and the chemistry between the two of you. Your sort of serious side, but you're also very funny, and Pastor Wolfmiller's sort of goofiness, but also his very serious side at times, and his deep side. It's very fun. It's very informative, and I really appreciate that you've somehow found a reason to continue to do it for 8 years now.
Yeah, we're looking for a reason to quit. So as soon as you can give us one, we'd appreciate it.
All right. Well, now back to our topic at hand. I was thinking about this subject for a couple of weeks. I was kicking around some ideas, and was thinking about tackling it solo and doing sort of a monologue on it. But I thought about having somebody with a little more authority to speak to this issue, and you came to mind. So the first point I was thinking of making was that we as Christians should recognize that all lives matter because life's a gift from God, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that we want to recognize the sanctity of human life as something that is intrinsically valuable, and you're right, because it is a gift from God. Now, I think there's a couple of ways that Christians typically talk about this. The first one is to point out that man was made in the image of God, and that's true. And because that sets a distinction for humanity over against, say, animal life, that God did not create, dogs or deer or whatever in His own image, so that there is a distinction between the life that He has given to mankind and the life He has given to animal life, and that is true. However, the image of God is talking about really the will that man has, and in the Garden of Eden it was created perfectly so that man had the same will of God, and that's maybe a topic for another day. But I think another place we could go to, still in the same context, biblically speaking, to stand on the foundation that human life matters intrinsically, is simply to see what God had given Adam to do. And He had given Adam authority in the Garden of Eden to care for the garden, and that includes all the animals in the garden. Mm-hmm. Now, this is to say then that God in creation sets up a pecking order, so to speak, that it was not the tigers who were given authority over Adam, but rather Adam had authority over the tigers. Mm-hmm. And then we should ask the question, well, what has authority over Adam? And there's only one answer to that question. It is God Himself. Right. So God is then the authority that we are answerable to, and He has the right to give life or take life away. And none of us then bear the authority to end the life of another human being, except for, well, in these exceptions I'm sure we'll get into. But intrinsically, human life is valuable simply because, as you said, it is a gift given to us by God.
So when we talk about all lives matter, then we're not just talking about white folks. We're talking about everybody. We're talking about whites. We're talking about blacks, red, yellow, all races. The Bible doesn't distinguish.
That's right. Yeah. So we're going to stand on this foundation that God has made everyone within this human race, and despite whatever a race they may be a member of, they too hold this intrinsic gift from God as life. And you mentioned this kind of controversy that started in this distinction between Black Lives Matter and then saying all life matters. And Bill Maher chimed in on this conversation, and he said that to state the phrase "all life matters" or "all lives matter" implies that all lives are equally at risk, which they're not. And I think there we're starting to see the separation in this whole controversy, that maybe two sides are talking about two different things. Mm-hmm. We want to recognize that that when we talk about race, there certainly are distinctions, but the distinctions are in, say, culture and history and background. And so when we're talking about culture, we're not going to just blend all races together and pretend that say Mexicans have the same background as Europeans or something like that. There are certainly differences, and they have different values and different cultural aspects that are unique to them, and those things are good. But when we're talking about the value of human life, that's the realm in which we cannot make distinctions in race to suggest that one race has more value in life than another race. This is going to be one category where we want to be colorblind in this case. That's not to say we should be colorblind in all categories, but in the category of the value of human life, that is where we should be colorblind. And so when it comes to the value of life, we want to make no cultural difference whatsoever.
Right, absolutely. So what about non-Christians? What about non-believers? Does God care about those people? What does the Bible tell us about those who don't even believe at all?
Right. Well, yeah. So when it again comes to matters of human life, there's no distinction between Christians and unbelievers. In fact, the scriptures talk about the rain falling on the just and the unjust. So we're not they're talking about the matter and value of human life. God is talking about who gets the things that God uses to provide for sustenance, things like rain and crops and food and shelter and clothing.
Right.
That God does not discriminate. I'm going to give my good gifts to believers, and then when it comes to the unbelievers, I'm not going to give it to them. No, he gives his good gifts to all people. And I would argue, too, that the reason then he gives his good gifts to all people is because he has sent his son to die for all people. You see, if you remove the cross, if you remove the promise of forgiveness, you would have a naked sinner standing before a holy and righteous God, and the result would be only punishment and damnation. But when you add the cross, you add God's promise, God's work of salvation, the forgiveness of sins to the mix. Now you don't just have sinners standing naked before a holy and righteous God. You have sinners who have been died for, and that is true for the entire world. Now, that's not to say everyone is saved. Those who believe in this promise are saved, but it is to say that God does not interact with us, each and every one of us, according to our sins. He interacts with us in view of what his son has done for the entire world. And for that reason, he will send rain to fall upon the just and the unjust. He doesn't let sinners perish away in starvation because they're sinners, or else we would all be starving away.
Right. It's not uncommon to see these stories about criminals who meet their untimely demise while, committing a crime. Like there was this 17-year-old Devin Martez in Louisiana last week who was just he died stealing a pair of rims, or the more high profile cases like the Michael Brown case or the Trayvon Martin case, and it's not uncommon to hear them denigrated. It's not uncommon to hear them called thugs, or to say that they got what they deserved, or to hear people almost celebrating that they got their just desserts, so to speak. But as Christians, as a Christian, I kind of feel uncomfortable with that. How should we as Christians view these deaths? How should we feel whenever we hear about a young man who's lost his life in a life of sin, committing a crime like this?
Yeah. Now you bring up a good point, because this is really where we're putting what we said earlier to the test. If we're going to say all lives matter, and we hear about someone even committing a crime is killed in the midst of that crime, if we rejoice in that death, then we should really be wondering, well, do we really regard all lives as something that matters?
Right.
And at the end of the day, there's still a mother who cries over that death, right? No matter if they were in the middle of robbing a bank, the police rush in and have to use lethal force, and that life is lost, there's still a mother who cries. And I think that then we have to make some distinctions. While upholding that all life matters, we should never rejoice in the loss of life itself, because life, as we said, is intrinsically valuable. There are times in which authority must carry out a particular task, and that particular task is going to be perhaps good for a society, and yet still a sad, tragic thing. And I think the place to go to for this is Romans chapter 13. This is where Paul, writing to the Romans, says that every person should be subject to the governing authorities. There's no authority except for God, that those who exist have been instituted by God. But listen to what verse 4 says, Romans 13:4. For he is God's servant for your good, he being the authority here. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. So in the matter of a police officer carrying out a matter of lethal force, in so far as he's doing that according to the authority given to him, he is acting as God's servant. Now, here's probably the thing we need to understand about authority. That authority is given. So whenever someone acts in their authority, they're doing something on behalf of someone else.
Right.
So that's pretty easy with the police officer. They're enforcing the law on behalf of the state. The primary place we talk about authority is with parents, and the parent is caring for a child in God's behalf. They're the human agent which God is using to provide for the child. A judge, same thing, as far as on behalf of the state. So that if I, for example, was downtown, I said, Lloyd, I forgot my laptop computer. Would you go to the house and get it? I have just then given you authority to act on my behalf to go into my home and grab my laptop. Now, if I hadn't given you the authority for you just to go into my house and take my laptop, we call that stealing, right? Breaking and entering.
Right.
And you'll never know what my wife then has waiting for you on the other side of that door. But if I have given you authority, then you are acting on my behalf to get the laptop, but I haven't given you the authority to take my TV. You see,
right.
And that's the same thing with the police officer. The police officer is, with the authority vested in them by the state, are exercising a particular task, and insofar as they do so within the bounds of their authority, they're acting as God's agent. Now, if a police officer then acts outside of that authority, then they are not acting as God's servant, an avenger for wrath. But the police officer then is acting on their own sinful, and this happens too. We've seen a case in Alabama and another one in St. Louis where a police officer has discharged lethal force and have done so outside of the authority given to them, and they were indicted and on trial for murder. Even though they're police officer, they're given a gun, they can't just use that gun any way they want to.
Right. The Walter Scott case in Charleston, South Carolina, where the man was running away and the police officer shot him. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. So there he wasn't given the authority to discharge his weapon. He was acting on his own. So what we ought to be looking for then in cases like this is not the color of the skin of the people involved. That is completely irrelevant. What we ought to be looking for is the evidence in the case, and were the actions taken by the police officer within the authority given to them, or are they outside the authority given to them?
Right. And unfortunately, because there's so much of this mistrust that's been built up in our urban communities, in the black community, towards police, and it's all too often fostered by our media and by our politicians that sort of jump to these conclusions and make the assumption that, it had to have been racism before any of the facts come out. How do you, in your opinion, as a pastor, and when you see these things and you think about these things, how do we heal these divisions? How do we get to that place where in America you think where we can do what you were just talking about, where we can actually look at these things objectively again, and stop pointing the fingers before we know the facts?
I remember when I was in college, and I don't remember what the topic was, what was going on in my life, but there was something that I wanted to do, and I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do or not. So I went to my pastor, and I asked my pastor if I should do this thing or not. And he kind of looked at me and said, it's a sin to do something that you're not given the office to do. and that's probably another conversation also. But I think where this is going to help us in the question you asked is, what office have I been given, and how can I execute that office? So have I been given the office of juror? Have I been given the office of police officer? Have I been given the office of judge? And unless the answer is yes to one of those questions, then it really doesn't do society much good for us to be kind of spouting off on our opinions about this case and that case, unless we really know the evidence at hand. And again, that would be then the job of the journalist to do his job or her job well, to report the facts as they are there without a media bias. It's the job of a elected official, or say a president in this case, to execute the office, to point towards the authority, the upholding of authority, and not to break down that authority that's in our land. So we each have a particular job given, and I suppose our job as consumers of media in what we're doing there is that we want to be listening for with some level of healthy skepticism, to say, is this news agency delivering to me the facts so that I can be well informed, or are they trying to influence my thinking one way or another, in which I need to be on the ball to identify that? So I think it comes back down to, what has God given me to do in relation to my neighbor?
All right. Well, it comes down to the 10 Commandments, as always.
It does. So that, I mean, everybody's kind of thinking, well, what does God want me to do? And they're looking at, I don't know, the writing in the clouds or something like this. Meanwhile, God has given us the 10 Commandments to love your neighbor. How do I do that? Well, I respect authority. I don't kill them. I love them. I love my wife and my children, and this is what God has given me to do.
Yep, exactly right. It's all right there. It's very simple if we would just if we could just get back to it. Well, Pastor, thank you again for joining us. It's very very enlightening, really good stuff. I thank you so much for taking time today.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks again for having me on.
All right. Pastor Evan Goeglein is the pastor of Faith Lutheran Church in Rogue River, Oregon, and the co-host of the long-running theological game show podcast, Table Talk Radio. Pastor, Christ's blessings to you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks again.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for another episode. Thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing. If you've got any comments or questions or suggestions for topics that you'd like to hear us discuss here on the show, visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback and send us a voice message or an email. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks to our contributors, Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense, Sergeant Bill Silvia, and Mia Anstine for their contributions to the show today. And a special thanks to Pastor Evan Goeglein of Faith Lutheran Church in Rogue River, Oregon, for being our special guest. And thank you for joining us this week. Until next week, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @ArmedLutheran. And like us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/TheArmedLutheran. You can contact us by email at armedlutheranradio@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 855-54-ARMED. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.